So I'm glad that people are taking advantage of this program. And before I start, I just want to share, I'm kind of excited because last night at the board of directors meeting, took me 4 years to research and write the history of Worcester County beekeeping. Uh, and for the past few years, it's been edited and prepared for book form. We're thinking about a hardcover, but too expensive. But what we ended up with was a 84-page spiral book with a soft cardboard cover, and the history of Worcester County beekeeping. And it tells you the beginnings, how we were the first county organization in the country to start beekeeping as a club, how it all started, and then the problems that the club faced over the years, financial problems, all kind of problems like during the 1920s, the lead arsenic issue with honeybees being killed. So some of the things I see repeating through history, and this is going to be on sale some probably in a few weeks, be out there for between 12 and $15. It's a deal, and there's some interesting stories about one of our beekeepers in 1953, not long after Roswell, New Mexico. And he was with a buddy catching a swarm in the woods in back of a neighborhood in the Greenwood part of Worcester, when all of a sudden people in the neighborhood saw lights flashing around, his spotlight up in the trees, and a ladder going up, and these guys in white suits looked like aliens. And so we called the police. And obviously, the police responded to the call. They came in, drove into the backyard, into the wooded area, and said, "What are you doing, gentlemen?" And they knew right away what it was, but they got the response that there were aliens. And here these two cruisers arrived, asking, "What are we doing?" "We're catching a swarm." "Sure you are." They were ready to leave by this point. That Wally Parker, some may know, some of the old timers may know Wally. He told this story many times, and I didn't know if that was accurate or not. But when I was researching this book, one of the stories I found was a true story in the Gazette with a political cartoon. They said, the two police officers said, "Open up what's in the box." And they said, "There's only bees that come out." He says, "Open up the box." They opened up the box, and guess what? Bees flew up out at the police officers, and they just ran. And Wally says, what do you want me to do? Just get the hell out of here." And so stories like that fascinated. I went through all the archives of the Worcester papers and some of the local papers in the region to get some of this information. So nice 84-page with photographs of the first president's beehives. So if you think you're interested, so we know how many hives to print, we'd like you to give me an email and say, "I'd be interested in purchasing the book." And that way, we got 100 going, but if it seems to be more, we go with more printing of the book. A history of Worcester County beekeeping. You'll certainly be fascinated, I think, with it, and well worth the money. So just shoot me an email, and we'll plan on whatever response I get for printing. Now with that, like I said, I prepared for this program. I meant to do it last year. I got tied up and didn't have time. This year, when I finished inspecting at the end of the December, I had some time, so I sat down and I put this program together. It brought back some very good memories to me, thinking about the 70 years of beekeeping and the 45 years of inspecting that I have been doing. I've been in probably 100,000 or so hives over the years. I've seen all kind of problems from soup to nuts, and learned eventually to deal with these different problems and find what was the best method to resolve them. And so I put together in this program, it's a 6-part program that the first half will be presented tonight, and in April will be the second half. What's wrong with my hive? That seems to be the most asked question out there. When people call me, they know something's wrong, but they don't know what it is and what they should do. And like I said, tonight we've got from beekeepers that are just going to be starting, going to bee school, to the one with 51 years out there, John Ulmer, 51 years of beekeeping. He's in the Philippines. So he's in here tonight. Hopefully got through to listen in on the program. So this is a collaboration of my years of inspecting, my years of beekeeping with all my hives, and also 2 studies that I was involved in, the USDA study, the Harvard University study. So it's a compilation of everything, and I'm hoping to cover. So after the 2-part program, you understand, at least to some degree, what are the problems you can come across. Sometimes only one particular characteristic. Sometimes there are many factors that are affecting the hive, and you have to be able to try to diagnose the multiple factors. What is the crucial factor? What is the secondary factor in the hive that's going on? And it takes time. It takes years of being in your hive. And like I say to beekeepers, the only way you're going to learn to become a better beekeeper is to get into your hives on a weekly basis, see what's going on. Because if you don't, you're going to be a bee haver and you'll never learn what's going on in your hives and what's wrong. So get into your hives, be a beekeeper, and your bees need your help more than ever. In the 50s, when I started, we didn't have half the problems. We had no Varroa Mite, no tracheal mite. We didn't have chalk brood. We didn't have sac brood. We didn't have small hive beetle. Zima was just coming in the 1950s from the West Coast. And so we were dealing with American and European foul brood and some of the queen problems that we face still today, but even to a larger degree because of pesticides and so forth. So hopefully tonight's presentation will clear up the early problems here. And then the second half next in April will clear up what's going on with the rest of the problems. And some of them will be coalescing, both the problems that I discussed today, and some of them are tied in with the problems I'll be talking about in April. So you'll see a better picture, and maybe if you don't quite understand something here, you'll pick it up when I cover the other aspects of what's going on in my hive. Okay, if we could go next slide. So the issues that you can see here, and I won't read through everything. The first aspect I'm going to cover is queen issues. What are the problems that are tied in with the queen? And there are multiple problems that are tied in with the queen. Brood issues. What are the issues that are tied with brood? In other words, with the queen issues, many of them are visible. You can see them. And obviously, you may not know what's going on, but you know there's a problem. And the brood issues, likewise, most of them, you're visual, you can find out, and I'll talk about that. The third issue tonight will be Varroa mites and associated viruses that are a deadly combination for our beehives that I never faced in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then, of course, next April, or this coming April, seasonal and temperature issues that affect the hive. Things like dearth, honey pollen bound, starvations, nutritional deficiencies, ventilation, moisture. The fifth aspect in April, nuisance issues. Small hive beetle, wax moth, ants, mice, skunks, bears, yellow jackets, praying mantis. And of course, 6 is other issues, hive placement, neighbor issues, pesticide issues, identification of kills, food sources, expanding your apiary will be the last 6 issues. So with that, we can go to the next slide. Here's just a picture of me, just about 6 years old. I got my hive for my 5th birthday. And believe it or not, we think of hives, you want them to go smoothly. Most people say they think they'll get everything right and everything's going to be right forever. Well, you're not in the right hobby if you want that to happen, because it's not. There's always going to be a challenge in the hobby of beekeeping. Multiple challenges, sometimes triple challenges, and you just get one challenge straightened out and another pops up on the scene, and sometimes it's discouraging. But there's nothing more satisfying than get into that beehive with you and the bees, and it's such a peaceful, you're looking at this little mini organism doing everything that they need to survive. and, getting the nectar, their pollen, building their wax, raising their young. And you just observe, nothing more. Like I always say, I can remember when I started inspecting, I was there in Tyringham, Massachusetts, up in the Berkshires. Well, one of my first hobbyist inspections, and looking down at the river in the valley below. And here I am by myself with the beehive and such peace, oh, serenity. It just calms you. And so you can tell my love for beekeeping is there, still is after, 70 years of beekeeping. So one of the things my dad in this picture, we had a contest. And what happened is my dad said, whoever gets more honey is the winner, and they'll have to take the loser out to dinner. So I was saving up my change and my spending money, hoping to, on the other hand, hoping to win. And my dad in August, he believed at the end of August, take off the honey, leave the rest for the honeybees instead of feeding sugar syrup. Even then, he knew sugar syrup wasn't as healthy as honey. So we had the contest. Come August 30th, we took off our honey. We went into the honey house. He weighed his up. He had 76 pounds. I weighed up my honey. Well, he did 84 pounds. And he said, you beat me. You beat me. I don't know how you did that. You're a great beekeeper. He got me so psyched up. I remember running in, Ma, guess what? I won the contest. Dad's going to take me out to eat. And I was totally excited. He knew what he was doing. And so we went to the restaurant. I had the most expensive meal on a steak dinner for $2.95. That would have been 1956. And the chef was the bottle washer, the waiter, and the chef all in one, and down at the bungalow. And after that, I never looked back. I love beekeeping, watching my dad, and he was my mentor. So here I am, still excited, as you can see. So go ahead. Now, our hives are coming out of the winter. Here you can see Dave Lucon, myself. We're winter feeding the Harvard University hives here, and hoping that they make it through the winter months. It's a crucial period up here in the Northeast. So when I talk about all these issues, I'm going to talk about it as though it's up here in the Northeast, because most of you are Northeast beekeepers. People in Florida do different. People in Arizona do totally different. Pacific Northwest, because different weather, different climate is going to affect bees different. Management is different. So we have to adjust, like how so many that come from other parts of the country. Oh, it's far different up here. And you better believe it. It's probably one of the most difficult parts of the country to keep bees in and manage bees because of the weather conditions. So here we are, and we're hoping that the bees come through the winter, but there's not much you can do beside feed them. And we'll be coming out of the winter months and then evaluating. The only thing you can do in the winter to know is, my hive all right? Those clusters that you should see, they should be growing and expanding. If they're shrinking, that's not a good sign. But January a little bigger, February a little bigger. And so that's the only thing we do in the winter months. Now, obviously, as we start here, you want to give your beehives a beautiful home to live in. Here, this beautiful Victorian beehive. What could a bee ask for? A beautiful little overhang there in the top level, and they got the bottom entrance to come in, even a set of stairs. So you want to give them a nice home. If not, something like this, something a little more primitive. Next. Here you can see me last year with my European hive and my, my dad's European hive. He'd get the punk wood out of the middle and we'd create a hive. Then he actually made those skeps, hand wove them, and we'd do demonstrations. But you want to give your bees a nice home. Okay, go ahead. Now, let's get into, before we start on what can go wrong, we all hope to have a strong hive, a hive that's boiling with bees, producing honey, is remaining healthy, everything's going beautifully, and you hope it stays that way. Isn't that the truth? That's what we all shoot for. But in 50, 60% of the cases, that's not what happens, because we hit a stone wall with something, and before you know it, we've got to find out what is going on. In some cases, the bees will take care of it themselves. But in many cases, especially today's day and age, where bees aren't adapted to things like mites, some of these viruses, a small hive beetle, we have to step in. It takes, thousands of years for bees to adapt to changes. And so we here with all these challenges, and next month, Jeff Pettis from who was the head of the USDA lab in Beltsville was going to be talking about problems, world beekeeping and problems throughout the world that we could be seeing down the road here. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed, because there's a couple that are far worse than what we have now that are coming along. Jeff will talk about, he's been out to these countries and seen, and he'll also talk about the other half of it will be the queen in the colony. Why are we facing so many bad queens nowadays, where years ago we didn't face? So 2 key topics. So, keep an eye out for the March meeting. Okay, go ahead. Now, here's some of the factors that affect dynamics that you should be aware of, that make changes in your hive, that can cause problems within the hive. One, the outside temperature. Obviously, if temperatures too long stretches of low temperatures in the 20s and below, the bees can't get out, defecate, that can cause problems, which we'll talk about. Nectar flow. If there's no nectar flow, because there's been a dearth, which is the next cause, their next dynamic, and there's no moisture in the ground, there's no nectar flow. And the bees run out quick food very quickly. And now, if you don't take action, then you can, but we'll be talking about that in April. Pasturage. With all the neighborhoods and build up beautiful lawns with no weeds, no dandelions, you have to look at the pasturage. Does your area have enough pasturage for that hive to thrive on? You may not. I've had to move hives from different locations because there just wasn't enough pasturage. 29 years ago, plenty of pasturage, but when new development comes in and those $10,000 lawns, that eliminates a lot of the pasturage, and the hive can't thrive because they need a variety of nectars coming in, pollens coming in to keep healthy and to stay alive. Hive oversaturation. I just showed Doug Partridge a map with 39 beekeepers in Northbridge. You can't go more than a quarter of a mile without finding 2-3 hives. It's compared to 1950s and 60s, 5 beekeepers in Northbridge. I look back at my list of 1957 membership list, and we had 5 beekeepers. Equipment, you want to always have good equipment, that the queen has nice frames that are not black, dark, disease-ridden, good frames and bad frames, which we'll talk about. Genetics. Now, this I consider, and that's what I'm going to start off with here in a minute. The genetics are the key, I'd say, of all the factors. If the queen's a dynamic queen, that is going to make your hive 70% determines the dynamics of that hive. You've got a good queen with good genetics. She's laying a good pattern. Obviously, is mild-mannered. So the genetics, you haven't got aggressive bees that you have a hard time working with. So we're going to talk a lot about queen problems coming up here, and there are a lot. Pollen sources, which would tie back to the nectar flows as well. And there are pollen dearths, and that causes nutritional problems for honeybees, because if they don't have pollen, you'll find nutritional deficiencies, and people think it's European foul brood, but it's those little larvae being fed a low diet of pollen, not enough, and they start turning yellow, drying up, becoming crusted, and people often mistake that issue for a disease when it's nutrition. There's no pollen. How many hives have I gone around and said, this isn't European foul brood, this is nutritional deficiency. You need to get a pollen patty in here to feed the bees. And of course, diseases, which we'll deal with here in the second aspect today. Pests, which we'll deal in April. Seasonal bursts, changes in season, which affect the hives. Abnormalities, which we're going to talk about here, swarming super seizure, and different abnormalities that are going on. And finally, the fall cluster, you want it to be perfect going into the winter months. So they make it through the winter, like you saw on the slide, and make it through so you have your hive. And there's nothing like in the spring on that first warm day, seeing your bees going out, bringing back pollen. Oh, such a delightful pleasure to see the bees, you know, and when there's a dead hive, it's like, it's a downer. You wonder, what did I do wrong? Why did the bees die? You know, and if they starve, that makes it all the worse. You look in there and say, that's my fault. And so as a result, you've got to be aware of these factors and be able to identify what factors that this hive maybe isn't doing well. Go ahead. Now, this chart I put in here, because this is an important chart to look at. It's roughly made, but a hive in January is at its lowest numbers in bees, usually about 8 to 10,000 bees in January at a low point. And then the queen starts to start laying at first with little patches of brood. And if there's more bees, that's why a large winter cluster going into winter of September and October bees, that's what you want. You'll find a bigger cluster. If you go in with a smaller cluster, by January, they're much smaller and they start with these little, and sometimes they can't redeem enough bees before all the old bees die. So that nice cluster in the fall with northern bred queens is always a plus. I always look for northern acclimated queens. And you see, they slowly build up. So by the end of May, early June, they're at peak 60, 80,000 bees. And then they level off and keep it at that. But you see in the buildup, you'll have hives with 10 to 12 frames of brood and bees. They're just building. A dynamic queen will bring that hive up. And millions of years, they build for the peak flow, the nectar flow. And you notice when that happens, April through July is the flowers, the trees all blooming, the fruit trees, the berries, all those wildflowers that give you nectar. And so they're building for that peak nectar flow. And then it levels off. And you got to keep in mind one thing I found: to have a hive keep its numbers, you need 8 frames of bees and brood. Key fact there. Yeah, that's what I always look for in my hives. Do I have 8 frames, at least 2/3 filled with brood? That's a key for me. And I found that you follow that rule. If you become honey bound, they don't have the room, or pollen bound is so much, they can't have that. And your hive quickly goes down in numbers. And that's not what you want in June at peak flow. You want bees to keep building and keep a level. So 8 frames will keep it at that level that you see at the top of the chart. And then slowly by the end of October, they're finished their brood rearing, and quickly the numbers, brood rearing starts to end, so that by the end of November, usually they're done with brood rearing up here in the Northeast. So the big cluster, what you want is a key. You want plenty of space in September and October, because these are the bees that carry over to January. And if you don't have that big cluster, or you don't have a large amount of bees, you got queen problems in September and October, and don't get the brood, you're not going to have a good winter cluster. And that is a downfall in itself. Now, the one thing as we get in here, you notice this on that chart, loss of a queen, but not necessarily just loss of a queen. But if any problem, a disease problem hits and you don't catch it soon enough, guess what happens? That growth of dynamics now starts to dwindle and go in a downward spiral. And it'll keep going in the downward spiral if the bees don't repair it. And if you don't get into the hives and catch that downward spiral, whatever it is that's causing it, and we're going to be identifying the things that are causing it here in this talk. So as you look at the downward spiral, I've seen it where you get the loss of a queen, and they, for some reason, aren't able to replace it. And we'll talk about some of the issues where they don't. Then guess what? You may get in there, it's too late. The hive can't be saved. And then you feel so bad because you know it's your fault that you didn't get in there. You're going to be a beekeeper, not a beehaver. So if you're in this hobby, expect challenges, expect, things to go wrong because it's not going to stay right. And you'll see as we finish this talk, your head's going to be spinning. But 50% of the time, everything's going right. The other 50%, you got problems through the season, but some of them are just minor problems. Others are major ones, and some are not repairable, and I'll talk about some of those issues. Go ahead, Ann. Okay. Now, here's what you'd like to see. Queen issues. Now, you want a good, vibrant queen in your hive, marked or unmarked, a nice thick abdomen, long abdomen that fills up all the cells. You can see here the bees. You know that things are going right. There's the queen. Surrounding her is the court. The court, they take care of her, they groom her, they feed her, they take care of everything. And she continues during the brood rearing season from January through November, laying eggs, and that's her job. And only recently has several of the studies, they used to say does it all night, all day during that brood rearing season, which she does, but now there's been studies that show she goes into a transition state for 10, 15 minutes. The court stays around her and she stops. It's like a rester. And a couple of studies have now come up showing that. So we do know that she does take breaks and stops, and then, but you constantly see her moving around, but in an orderly fashion. One of the things when you go into a hive, I can tell right away if something's going on. Are they orderly? Are they everything? The bees are slow moving, everything's orderly, and they're not running around haywire. That tells me right away, uh-oh, something's wrong here. The bees all scattered running around that hive instead of, even though you're opening it, yeah, you might have one or two come at you, but for the most part, all the bees, after you're gentle with them and you give them just a little smoke. Just keep in mind when you open a hive, one of the things that can upset them is over smoking. Just keep in mind, you're not making smoke kielbasa. All you're doing is gently smoking them, a few little light puffs, let them know you're coming in. They're going to go and gorge themselves with honey. And then once they see you're not hurting them, and folks have seen me at many of the hive meetings we have, no veil, short sleeve shirt, and they're as calm as can be. They don't mind. They don't see you don't want to go on a bad day. But the queen is the crucial. I want to talk to you about queens. Go ahead. Now here you see a queen. This is a great picture taken by a teacher of mine, a friend teacher of mine that taught me for many years, great photographer. And this particular head of the queen is in, checking out before she lays the eggs. You can watch this when you're in the hive. You can watch I love to do that. Watch, what is the queen? And some of the queens will run and hide, but a lot of them, once they got that thick abdomen, they just continue moseying along if you're not hurting anything and putting their head in. And then you see them putting that abdomen in and laying the egg. Okay, next. And what you want to see, a good queen, you're evaluating. Here you can see the brood pattern, all capped brood. You see up above, uncapped brood. So she started from the center and moved outward in a big concentric circles, filling up all the cells. But you say, what about those empty cells? You're always going to find some empty cells. They may be rounded, this might be stretched, they might be a wire running through below them, and the queen's not going to lay eggs. So, but that number is okay. The percentage you see, that's a beautiful brood pattern. And young larva, and we're going to talk about, you're looking as you check into a hive, one of the things you want to do on every inspection, very quickly, look at your brood, and we'll be talking about it specifically, and looking to see if there's any puncture marks, sunken cappings that you should probe. So if you catch something early, guess what? You can repair it, and that hive is going to go into an upward spiral. Whereas if you don't catch it and it continues, that hive is starting to go into a downward spiral. And that's what you don't want. That's why I say I'm for weekly inspection. Some say too much, but I say you're interested. That's the hobby, the love of the hobby, getting in and working with the bees, seeing the bees, helping them to whatever you need to do. You know your part, and you're doing your part because they'll do theirs and do even beyond. And of course, you see some damage to the brood, pulling out the frame, punctured some of the cappings there. Okay, go ahead. Now, here's what we're evaluating here on this frame. It's a very patchy pattern. And it's not that it's hatched. There's no new larva or brood in there. In this case, it was a bad queen. And when you get in, many people say, well, maybe she'll improve. If she's laying a patchy pattern, you get a package or you get a new, and you see a patchy pattern, she's not going to improve. You have to act. It's your call, because sometimes they don't take care of it themselves. Most of the time, they'll take care of a bad queen, and that's what we'll be talking about. But if you get this kind of pattern, that hive will never be dynamic, never be the strength that you want it to be, because the queen isn't there and isn't dynamic. So here's a problem when you're seeing a patchy pattern. That's an issue. You should right away, I may need the new queen. You want to see a nice full pattern on at least eight frames. Like I say, most of the season, while they're building, though, you'll probably see 10 and 12 frames of brood through the months of April, May, June. And then it levels off after June, because we get into a dearth and she cuts back on the laying a little bit, and you're down to your 8 frames of brood and bees. Okay, go ahead. Now, the bees normally take care of abnormalities through a process called seizure. Seizure is a process by which they produce 2 queen cells, 3 sometime. They bring about, they know that the queen's not laying well. Sometimes, and I had to consult with a few of the experts on this, oftentimes a beautiful brood pattern, but they're superseding, particularly if you get a new package of bees with a new queen in there, but not always. If it's a bad pattern, sometime the bees take care of it. Sometime, why did they replace the queen? You got a beautiful pattern, they got seizure cells. But it's the pheromone system. The queen doesn't have she centralizes the whole hive through her pheromone system. And if her pheromone system isn't strong, moving through that whole hive, and this is what a few of the experts said, they also supersede, because I couldn't figure out. That's why I had to consult for tonight's program. The pheromone system could be failing and not strong, and as a result, superseding. The other reason is, like I say, oftentimes when you try to introduce a queen, Italian bees, and they put in a Carniolan queen in there, a different race, they tend to supersede more often than if it was an Italian queen. So as a result, they'll put 2 in seizure. There's always 2 cells made at the same time, sometime a third one. So you've got to really look. When you see this, when you see 2 on the one frame, it's usually all in one frame, not too far apart. You've always got to go through the whole hive to see if there are any others before we take action, because we'll be talking about what do you do for seizure. And what I found to be, after all these years, the best method for seizure. Now, seizure cells in themselves are a good size. They produce a nice queen, and the bees would take care of themselves, except if it's before middle of April, or if it's after September 15th, they'll try to take care of themselves. But what happens, there's few drones produced before then, and few drones by the fall. So one issue you've got is many fewer drones out there for mating. Secondly, is the fact that cold temperatures preclude her from mating. You could get a stretch of cold temperatures early on and later on. In that period, you know, May, June, July, August, you could let them produce their own queen. But I say, here's my solution to this, and it works very well, I find. If I've got a nice queen pattern, they're superseding, I can't figure out why. I go through, cut out the supersedure cells. I cut out the supersedure cells. And in many cases, that stops them. They don't re-supersede. But in some cases, if it is pheromone system is weakening, they're going to supersede, put more supersedure cells. Now you keep fighting the tide. So therefore, your best, like I say, in my case, the second time I cut them out and I get a queen. I have about 8 or 9 and nukes that I have ready, northern acclimated queens that I bred over the years, stock I've had over the years. And I take one of the queens in a cage, and especially early on, or even midsummer, you could let it go in those summer months and they'll produce a queen. But I feel it takes too much time, 2 weeks to hatch those 2 queen cells, another week or 2 of mating flights, then a few days when she comes back, finish to start laying. And then guess what? It's 3 more weeks before the first bees are hatching. In the meantime, what's happening, every 6 weeks, the bees are dying. So your numbers are declining very quickly with no new bees coming in until 7 weeks later. So that hive goes in a downward spiral for quite a bit. Whereas if you get a queen, my solution to this, I try cutting them out once, but when you cut them out, here's a key. Everybody hear this. Before you cut out, make sure there's a queen in there. I made that mistake. I've cut them out and then didn't think and found out no queen. So guess what you've done? You've just now, you know, hurt the whole thing. They don't have a queen to even do anything, and so I suggest before you cut your queen cells out, your 2 supersedure cells or 3, you check for the queen, the old queen, because she's usually there right till the end and they battle. And that's another reason why, because both can get injured and now you're delayed even further. So with supersedure, like I say, it's best to requeen with a new queen. So what I do is have the queen, so you cut out your supersedure cells, have your queen ready, and when you cut out the supersedure cells, make sure before you put that queen cage in that your queen, at that point, you kill the queen if she's still there. And then you replace with a queen and put duct tape for about 3 days so they can't chew through that quickly, because they could kill a quick introduction. So I always put duct tape on for 2 or 3 days, then take it off and then let them chew through, and pretty good success with requeening. And guess what? Now that queen within 2-3 days, it starts laying. You're not waiting that long period of no eggs, no larvae. So supersedure is a way of the bees replacing bad queens themselves. But up here in the northern latitudes, if you see supersedure cells and after September 30th, before April 30th, it won't happen. Mating won't happen. And so as a result, you've got to go with a queen that you introduce. Okay, next. Now, they can be anywhere, but usually you see them side by side with supersedure, side by side. And obviously, you can see here, these aren't so large. You're going to see some very large, and some supersedure cells are larger, others smaller. But usually with supersedure, you get a good queen, but it's just that time period that it takes to requeen that whole hive. Meantime, it's going a downward spiral. And if you get a fall and it's a downward spiral in the fall in September and October, guess what happens? No worker bees go building for the cluster. So super seizure, coming at, in beginning of September, if you start to see super seizure, you don't play around and take time or wait. I'll cut them out and wait 2 weeks, see if they rebuild them, because you don't have that time, because super seizure up here in the Northeast, you need September and October bees to winter that hive. Okay, so those are some key points. Now, and you can see here, we won't talk much, but in this case, there was, I remember the frame, the drones, all the drones, it was very patchy, and with the work, there was a worker brood, but this was a failing queen. A queen starts, once you see a queen starting to lay, you might get a package, introduce the queen, and for a couple of weeks, a nice brood pattern. But if she wasn't mated well, she's going to run out of sperm, especially if it's cold down south, and she's going to start continue laying unfertile eggs. And that's what you don't want. Messes up all your frames with drone brood. And so they supersede. But again, that progress, you should recognize a bad pattern before that. Sometimes the bees wait. But if you're recognizing the queen on every frame is laying more than 10% of the drones, and that's high, then you need to requeen. And like I say, my advice, but if you want to see your own super seizure queen, by all means, but I'd recommend cutting out the other cell and just keeping one once they're capped. And like I say, now another problem with queens, remember the idea here is to keep the spiral moving upward. Now this I got this is a picture I took. I took the queen out of the cell just as the egg was coming out of her ovipositor. This is a many year old picture that, again, my friend teacher took. But I've been around. I got a call 7-8 years ago, and Ken, I'm not seeing any eggs. The last 2 weeks, I said, "Do you have a queen?" "Yeah, she's in there. She's walking around." So I went up, and that was out in Spencer. And I went out there and I looked, and I knew exactly, not the egg was jammed in the ovipositor with just a little bit of it showing. And at that point, I took a toothpick and I held her, and I had to careful, you don't squeeze that abdomen. And I held her really tightly, and with a toothpick, not to jab her, I just started getting the egg and I pulled it out. And guess what? No more than 3 days later, she called me and said, "Ken, she's laying eggs again." This happens not often, but I've seen 15, 20 times over the years, eggs jammed in and the queens aren't laying. And it happens, and there again, I discussed that issue a little bit with one of the experts, and some of the eggs are larger. In different times of the season, they tend to be a little larger, and they get jammed in there. And of course, sometimes the queen and the queen just can't get that out. And so the one that I took out was just barely coming out, so the young lady didn't catch it. But this kind, you can see, obviously, this would be an easy fix. You just take your fingers gently on the egg and pull it out gently. And but look for your queen. She's not laying. That could be it's an issue. And then, of course, some that come back from mating, I've seen also the male parts are still in her, and she's back in the hive, apparently unable to eject them. Go ahead, next. Now, what happens when a queen isn't mated? So many of you that have been getting, and Jeff Pettis will talk about this, many of you that have been getting packages, and this is a much more common problem today than I saw back in the 50s and 60s with packages. we're in a rush to get our bees up here. The southern producers want to get them out early. They get the packages. We're getting them as early as March 21st in some cases over the years I've seen. And guess what? The South is cold still. The queens haven't been mated, but they've got orders to fill for 500 packages. And I shook bees for 2 years and made up packages when I was stationed down in Tennessee. And I know, they take these queens as fast as they can get them, not even mated. And one of the companies was in Mayhew, Mississippi. I remember the boss I said, and his name was Dave as well. Dave, no more mated queens here. So look, I got 500 packages to get out of here. Just put in those queens over there. They weren't mated. And so what happens is they rush because they got a big demand, and an unmated queen comes up. Well, guess what? She's going to lay nothing but drones because she has no sperm in the spermatheca or very little. And so she starts ejecting eggs. That's why I tell new beekeepers, when you get a package, keep a close eye. Usually it's not a nice pattern and all the eggs aren't filling every cell. That's what a good queen should do. If you're seeing a very speckled pattern right in the beginning, you can probably identify it before they're even capped, because you're waiting. Don't forget, you're waiting for them to be capped before you can identify it. But if it's speckled, you can already suspect it's probably a drone laying queen, because she don't fill every cell. She jumps around. Her abdomen's thinner, and I'll show you a picture here in a minute. But that is a drone layer. Now, the sooner you can see what the problem is here. Here you can see how they're making the bullet, because the larva is much larger, and they have to come up, make that bullet shape in order to have the cap the drone, because they had 21 days for the drone to hatch. The worker bee, 21 days for the worker bee, 24 for the drone to hatch. But drone layers, you want to catch it as soon as possible, because guess what? You're going to have all the worker bees dying because doing all the work. That hive very quickly is going to be filled with all drones, and the drones don't do anything. So sometimes I've gone out to package people with hives that all drones. They've waited too long and to identify. It's always that bullet shape, speckled bullet shape. And the sooner you can identify it, get a good queen, kill off what you do is take the old queen out and do it the same day you put the new queen right in. Why? Because if they got fertile eggs in there, if you take the old queen out and wait 2 days to put your new queen in, automatically, guess what they're going to do? They're going to produce, if they got fertile eggs, they're going to produce swarm cells, not swarm cells, queen cells. And you don't want that, because this is March, April. That queen's not going to be mated. So be sure to do it the same day. I always recommend the same day, take out the old drone layer, put your new queen with duct tape. In 2 to 3 days, leave it on, take it out. This way, the new queen's pheromones are spreading through the hive, much more likely to get accepted. But if you let it go too long, you got all drones, and you try to introduce a new queen, much less likely. Plus the fact that hive is going to dwindle down to all drones, no nurse bees to take care of the hive. Now, that for drone layers is what I recommend, no matter, even later in the season. Replace it with a queen that you purchase. Okay, so here you can see the pattern. See that speckle pattern here? And eventually, this is where a lot of people think they got disease. When there's all drones and not many worker bees, you get neglected drone brood. It looks like European flower brood because there's no worker bees to tend to the larva. It turns yellow. Because they're not getting food, they get contorted in the cells, and a lot of mistakes. I see people call me out. What it is a drone line, neglected drone brood, and it's not European flower brood, but very easily mistaken by new beekeepers, even senior beekeepers that don't realize neglected drone brood because there's no nurse bees to feed the larva. Go ahead. Now, sometimes they abort. Both super seizure cells, you'll see it, and you'll see and this is what I had to talk to a few of the, I think it was, Marla Spivak on this one. That the board, they season early, they started too early, the bad weather for a long time, they'll abort all kind of, whether it be super seizure, cells or swarm cells, they abort them. They chew through, kill the processing queen, and you see these aborted queen cells. Or sometime with the next, with emergency cells, we see that a lot. Okay, so go ahead next. Now, this is the confusing part to most beekeepers. They think these are super seizure cells. When you kill, if you're in a hive and you kill the queen, or something happens to the queen where she dies, very quickly, within 2 to 3 hours, they're producing emergency cells, usually about all in the same frame. Not always, but for the majority, I've seen over the years, they seem to pick one frame and produce 8 to 10, but they're small. Emergency cells are these very long, sometimes they're taking 1-day-old larvae they haven't, so they're rushing it, and so as a result here, you see these small cells, they're emergency cells. In this case, we actually found the queen. I was in the hive, and this one here, we found the queen on the bottom, a marked queen. She was dead on the bottom. How she died, I couldn't identify. Sometimes you can see the bee is squeezed too much and she dies, or I've seen queens that are injured and they've got one leg missing as you're putting the frame down in, the leg came off, or there's some kind of deformity. But if the queen dies, they immediately take whatever available cells they have that have eggs up to 2 day, larvae up to 2 days old. After that, they can't produce the queens. And so what happens is the emergency cells, but in this case, with emergency cells, I find the queens are never dynamic. I really find dynamic queens. In this case, what I do is cut out all of them. You got to go through the whole hive, even though they're mostly all on one. I've seen sometime one or here two. And if you try introducing a new queen, they'll kill her. Once bees have a queen cell, even though they don't have a queen, but they've got a queen cell, they rarely will accept the new queen you try introducing because they've got a queen in progress. And so you need to carefully, and this is difficult. Imagine a small cell like you see here on these frames, those small cells. Well, it's easy to miss one down in the corner somewhere, and you've got a cell and you put a queen, you wasted $40. Introduce a queen, they're going to kill her. Now, another way to find out if there's a queen, a sure way, is to take eggs. If you got another hive, you can take a frame with eggs in it, and if they have no queen, they'll make cells. And sometimes bees get in a situation, there are no eggs, larvae, and they try making desperation cells to save themselves, but it's too late. It's an unfertile egg, and a desperation cell is worthless. So the best bet, cut them all out, make sure you get all of them, and introduce a queen at this point as well. And you hopefully be careful in the fall because you can't get queens. The fall, it's almost impossible late in the fall. So if you kill a queen late in the fall, and that's why I suggest in the fall, those frames are thick with honey, and you're trying to pull up a frame, make sure you get way out to the outside edge where rarely will the queen be, and pull it out, and then spread your frames apart and putting them in likewise, because I've seen, and late in the season, like I say, you could even end up that queen going in, not being mated, and guess what? You come into that winter cluster. By January, the bees are all dead because they have no young bees, and they just can't keep the heat, and as a result, your hive perishes. So these are all, like I say, and here you can see a drone lay. This was a drone laying queen I took out of hive. Very thin body. You can see a laying queen's got a nice thick body. Is slow moving. The drone layers move around very quickly. I find that they really run around the hive, and a quick moving queen with drone layers, and you're starting to see a lot of drone. You see all drone brood everywhere. So But anyway, drone layers. This is a desperation cell. This is worth the cell. They had an unfertile egg in there. I waited and till it was ready to hatch. It was a drone coming out. Okay. Now this is what I talk about, a nice pattern. When you get a new queen, you want to see a nice pattern. If it's drone layer, you're going to see speckled every other cell, every third cell. So you're looking early on into seeing, a nice full pattern. That's going to be a sign that you've got a good, not all the time, but the majority of the time, you've got a good dynamic queen, and it's a fertile queen. Go ahead. Now, the third type of cells you're going to see, fourth type of cells, I guess, queen cells, are swarm cells. Now, this is really nature at its best. I call it an abnormality because when it happens late in the season or real early in the season, there are reasons, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what causes swarming? Let's look at that factor. One is it's a natural way. The bees build up, and so by middle of May, the bees are coming to peak strength. And nature's way for bees to reproduce is to swarm and start another colony out in the wild somewhere, in a tree, in somebody's house. And what happens is, that's okay. My dad used to say if a swarm goes early on, out of our hives, yeah, it'll repopulate nature, which is good. Except that the spring and the fall, like you said, they won't make it. And today, even in midsummer, a swarm goes, let's say in June. Guess what? They've got so many factors going against them. The mite issues and all kind of issues with that colony might not be able to build up. The mites not being treated is going to take that. So today I look at it as a swarm letting it go is a waste. If you knew it was going to make it, my own personal opinion, it wouldn't be a big loss. When I see a swarm go, I say, they don't know what they're in for. Honeybound, so brood congestion. In other words, everything in that hive is filled up with brood, 12, 14 frames of brood sometime less. Honeybound. In other words, the rest of the hive, oftentimes all filled with honey, pollen bound. The queen has no space to lay. She's now limited. And guess what? That sets off that swarming influx, and your hive is ready for swarming. Now, genetics. Years ago, we had Yugo queens come in from Yugoslavia, supposed to be the answer to Varroa Mite. But guess what? We'd get the queens, put them in, they automatically, almost like wanted to, for swarming. The hive wasn't even built up, but they'd be bringing about swarm cells. So sometimes it's the genetics, hive congestion, too many bees for the limited amount of space in that hive. Hive numbers 80 to 100,000. They're more than likely going to swarm, those strong hives. Now, in Mother Nature, certain conditions in Mother Nature, a great honey flow, great pollen, amounts of pollen coming in, that over millions of years, bees, that triggers swarming. Because bees know they have to leave much, and they know they're going to need to build a new nest. So over millions of nature, they trigger it to the buildup of that colony, and it's a natural process. So, go ahead, next one. Now, what sets off, there are signs. I should have put the chart in, I didn't, and after I realized it after. What are the signs of swarming early on so you can recognize them? Because you should be going in your hives starting in April on a weekly basis if you want to keep a hive from swarming. In other words, what are the signs? You're going to first start to see a bunch of teacups on the bottoms of the cells. They're just upside down teacups. Yellow wax, no, back. Yeah, it is. You can see some here, but if you could go back and, yeah, teacups, and that's one sign. And they start putting this white wax, and we'll go after, you'll see a picture of that. White mottled wax on the outside of the teacups. That is the first sign that you know they're definitely going to go. You'll also see early on a big burst in drone laying all of a sudden. Come end of April into May, all these, you've never seen so many drones. All of a sudden they go from worker to a lot of drones. That's another sign that the swarm season is here. And then you're going to see an egg in those white models, queen cups. And you're going to see anywhere from 4 to 12 and 15 queen cells I've seen in hives. And they're all, for the majority, are at the bottom of the frames in the top brood chamber. But guess what? Don't just count on that, because how many times have I found 1 or 2 swarm cells down in the bottom brood chamber, about near the top or in the middle? I don't know if it's their way of having a backup, but you got to always realize, once you see swarm cells, you've got to go through that hive frame by frame and check for the signs of swarming. Like I say, early on, you know it's going to happen. White mottled wax on the queen cups. That's an early. And then the other thing is bearding. Bearding on the front. The bees are already starting to separate themselves. You start to see bearding on the outside of the hives. That's another early sign that they're going to swarm, because in May, early June, we don't get that real heat that would cause bees to also beard. So if you're starting to see bearding in May, middle of May, guess what? You better get into that hive, take a look, because that's an early sign of swarming. Now, obviously, you can do so much and give them room, but once they've started into that process, they continue it. So you could throw supers on. You got the cup with the egg in it, and you throw extra space on now. Give them extra empty frames down below. Once they set off the process, you're done. Now the other, so let's go on to the next step here in swarming. I gave you the signs of swarming. What happens in the process it goes through is this. They build the swarm cells, and with swarming, they always build one cell 4 to 6 hours before the others. And that varies a little bit, but there's always the chosen queen, that one cell that's built 4 to 6 hours and capped 4 to 6 hours. She's the chosen queen that's going to go out and kill the others in that hive. So, and if you go and you start to see the swarm and you want to experiment and see what happens, you watch that. One of those cells, and I don't know how many hives, and I know that's a definite, because I've been hive after hive, and there's always one cell that is capped first. I go into many of, and I see that one cap cell, and then the others, you go midday, end of the day, some of them are capped, but there's always one 4 to 6 hours ahead of the others, and I've seen that so many times. Now, what action can you take with swarming? Now, if you want to let them go and it's June, July, take your chances, you can do that. But just keep in mind with swarming, it's going to take 2 weeks for that queen to hatch. It's going to take 1 to 2 weeks of mating, a few days coming back and getting used to the hive, and before she starts laying eggs. And then it's 3 weeks before the first bees are hatching. And not only that, but you're losing 20,000, 30,000 bees out of that colony. Can you see, get my message? That colony goes down very steeply. And guess what? Most times you get 5 or 6 cells. You get not only the main swarm, but you get an after swarm and an after swarm, and sometime in after swarm. I got called by a gentleman on Green Street in Northbrook, 10, 12 years ago. He said, Ken, you want to swarm? I don't want any more bees. I went up, climbed about 15 feet up in the spruce tree, and I got a nice, beautiful swarm. He calls me up. I get home. He calls me up 2 hours later. Ken, there's another big swarm almost right near the other one was. I went up for the second swarm. It was nowhere near, but it was right next to where it was. I got a second swarm. And then a third and a fourth swarm. He called, I diverted it to somebody else. And I knew those would be smaller swarms because each after swarm is smaller. So a real strong hive, the main swarm goes out, because what happens is it takes 2 weeks for a queen to hatch from the time the egg is laid. 2 weeks, 14 days. The new queen will go out and swarm. The old queen will go out and swarm about 2 days, from anywhere from a day or 2 days after the queen cell is capped to minutes before the new queen is going to hatch out. And so there's a long period of time there, and you've got to take action. And I can tell you a short story about it in Uxbridge, a young lady, beekeeper, couldn't find a queen. And I said, it's going to happen from 2 days after it's capped to minutes. She went out every day between 10 and 3 and sat out there knitting, reading books. On the fourth day, so she waited out there on the third day, finally 1 o'clock in the afternoon, out came the swarm into the apple tree there. She called me up and said, Ken, guess what? They swarmed and I caught the swarm. She was so excited that she caught the swarm, but you don't need to do that. Now, how would you deal with a swarm and to prevent a swarm and do swarm prevention? That's one of the trickiest things, and there's no guarantees, but you can do a lot, because if you let them swarm, 20, 30,000 bees go, and it takes 7 weeks for the first bees to hatch, you're going to have, and if you got after swarms beside the gentleman in Northborough, his hive just died out, because you're unlikely for them to produce a queen when you get after swarms. And so what do? You start to see the early signs, or start to see a cup with eggs in it, a cup with eggs. Now, you have several possibilities. You got, usually it's swarming, most hives got 8, 10 frames of brood, honey, pollen. So you can do one or two things. Before they're capped, keep in mind, once a queen cell is capped, that queen is going to go. And there's something else we'll talk about you do if it's capped. But if they're uncapped and it's all open still, you go through, cut them all out. And then what you can do is, and again, my suggestion, or you leave one queen cell. You take 4 frames or 5 frames of brood, put it in another hive with that queen cell. You can make a split. It's making a split with the hive and replacing in that hive 3, 4, 5 built out cells, not foundation. Why? Because you want that queen to have plenty of space now to build that hive back up. You're splitting, and that swarm, that 5 frames of you're taking in May will certainly build up to a beautiful hive by the fall. That's if they're not capped. You're making a split and giving the old queen with 4 or 5 frames of brood left in that hive, you're giving her plenty of room and now delay swarming. The only thing is, I suggest you going back in a day or 2, 3 days and cut out, because I've seen sometimes they'll make 2 or 3 queen cells, but cut them right out. And I find that stops the swarming influx in the bees with taking that many frames of bees and brood, because you're going to lose them anyway. Might as well get yourself another hive. Now, if there's a capped queen cell, this is a whole different story. If you get into with plenty of queen cells in there, they're capped, there's only one thing you can do now. Because she's going to go no matter how many bees you take out of there. She's already programmed. So what you do is take the old queen, take the old queen out, okay? With this cap queen cells, you take the old queen out with 3 or 4 frames of brood and put that in another hive 12 to 15 feet away, because I've made the mistake putting it right next to the hive, and that old queen, smelling the pheromones, went right back into the hive. 15 feet, I've never had that happen. So what you do is take the queen, the old queen, move her 15 feet with 4 or 5 frames of brood, and put in, you can put in at that point foundation in that hive, and that old queen is going to keep laying, so that hive's going to build faster. And what happens, what's left behind, I recommend cutting out all the queen cells except for one. So here you can see the queen cells. You cut them all out except for one queen cell, the nicest, the biggest one. And what will happen is she'll hatch out. And without all the other queen cells, you won't get after swarms and lose any more. And what you've done here is false swarm them. The old queen would have swarmed out with half of the bees. You just false swarmed that hive. And now you build up another colony. And if they don't, there's no harm done, because guess what? If you got one of the 2 hives is weaker in a fall, you just combine them back. Take out your weaker queen, your poorer queen, and you combine them through newspaper. And now you've got a nice strong hive going into the winter months. So here you can see how the cell inside the cup there, on outside is white modeling. It's hard to see in this picture. And this is something else. It is a cut back. What I've done is cut a couple of queen. Here's the cup and the larva in there. It's already growing. They're feeding it honey, pollen, and bee bread, they call it. And from the hypopharyngeal glands, some enzymes. At this point, you can see, though, here, there's another cap queen cell. So you need to act by taking the old queen out. Go ahead. And here I've cut open some queen cells so you could see. This is royal jelly. And here you can see the larva is swimming and feeds on it. The bees produce they give extra pollen, more enzymes from the hypopharyngeal glands. There's much richer diet, so she can become a queen. The difference between a worker bee and a queen is the feeding during the larval stage. That is the difference. The difference in diet causes her to be able to have her female organs develop and be mated. A drone worker bee bred, but her female organs aren't developed because not given that same diet. So you can see here the queen that's raw, pure royal jelly. That goes for like $25 for just a little spoonful of that. I've been asked to produce it, and it takes a lot of work. You got to create queen cells, then scoop out royal jelly, and there's a demand for it. Go ahead. Now, here you can see, I just put this picture in because you can see what bees doing if they're tight, they don't have room in the hive, they put the honey up above and they start bringing it down and they push out any brood space, and that's going to cause swarming because she has no room, she's crowded. And a hive doesn't have to have 60,000 cells, 60,000, 80,000 bees to swarm. if you get a new nucleus in a box from one of the dealers, and sometimes these nukes have sat in these boxes. The queens have expanded. There's 3, 4 frames of brood full. They're full of honey and pollen. They have no more room. And how many times have we checked nukes and found swarm cells? And we had one gentleman here too that called me over in Sutton. So that was last year. And the nuke was so congested, and it was some bad weather, it had swarm cells, 4 swarm cells. Now what happens is a small swarm that's going to go out of there. But I told him just what I'm telling you here, that he prevented it. They were capped, but we found the old queen, removed her with 2 of the frames temporarily, transferred the other frames with the swarm cells into another box, a deep, and then I told them to wait, and then the queen cells, cut them out and put the queen with the 2 frames back into the 10 frame hive, and now given plenty of room, it prevented the swarm in that case. If I swarmed them and left that way just to before the new queen cells were going to hatch, and then I told them cut them out and then introduce all together. Okay, so swarming, if you're getting to a point, you should, if you're getting the hives on a weekly basis, you should never miss a swarm. And here's an easy way to be able to find out if your hive is going to swarm. The majority of cells are always going to be at the bottom of the top brood chamber. You heft up your top brood chamber, if nothing else, on a weekly basis, and you'll see the swarm cells. And then it tells you what to do. You know they're going to swarm. If it's bad weather even, and you can't get in, just quickly lift up the upper brood chamber. And if there's swarm cells there, you know you have to act quickly. And so you might have to put an umbrella or a tent over and take action, because 2 days later, it could be too late. So swarming, that's it. Now, the other thing I was going to say is nutrition. Now, sometimes people get poor brood patterns, and it's not because the queen is poor and they want to replace the queens. Poor nutrition, and I'll get more into that in April, but poor nutrition causes. So make sure you've got pollen, honey in that hive. If you've got a poor brood pattern, check for that first to make sure the queen hasn't come back because of a nutrition problem. Okay, so let's now go ahead next.
So Ken, I want to time check 8:25, and you're about halfway through your presentation.
Yeah, well, this part's going to go. This is the part I wanted to make really clear here. So, okay, go ahead. No. Now here's what Honeybound is. Here's what Honeybound is. Total frames filled with honey. Okay, go ahead. And here's what pollen, when you start to see pollen, sometimes 6, 8 frames in the bottom brood chamber, 8 frames of honey in the top brood chamber, there's no room for brood. It stimulates swarming. Go ahead. Or nectar. Combination of nectar, cured honey, and pollen certainly will set that out. So always keep that. You may have to spin out. How do you open up space for her? If that's the case, you've got to spin out honey and open up 8 frames of brood space for her. And, you know, let them keep the nectar. If you spin out, save that to feed. If you get a dirt, then feed that back to the bees later. But you've got to open up space to keep it from swarming. So you do swarm prevention, and you get all packed with honey, pollen, and she don't have any space. That's going to set off more swarming. Go ahead. And there's what you see. That's a 9-pound swarm, by the way. That's a 9-pound swarm. Imagine losing those bees, what it does to a hive. So you don't want that, in my mind anyway. Go ahead. And swarm cells are beautiful. They've got such a beautiful architecture to them. And here you can see the queen chewed her way out. See the capping at the bottom? She chewed 3/4, 4/5 away around, and out she came. And looked around and immediately took over in that hive, releasing her pheromones. She's already been releasing them in the queen cell. She's been piping, which is like beep, 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 a sound, letting them know that that she's here. Okay, go ahead. Now, if you go without a queen for a long period of time, if you go with queen for a long period of time, then what happens is workers take over. If there's no possibility of making a queen, you've gone, usually after 3 weeks, no queen, no eggs, what we call laying workers. This is the worst of problems in with queens or queen issues. The workers take over. They all start laying, but they can only lay unfertile eggs. And the early sign of that, you'll start to see 3, 4, 5 eggs in the bottom of a cell, on the sides of the cell, because their abdomen's not long enough. And as a result of that, what happens is if you don't catch it early, this is what happens. And don't straighten out your queen problems, you end up with laying workers. And at this point, it's hopeless. There's nothing you can do to save it, because people have tried all kinds of things, shaking bees away from the hive. Trust me, there's almost impossibility to rescue. Plus the fact that all your worker bees have been dying, all you got is drones. So in that sense, you have to say goodbye to the land workers. And okay, and what you see here is how a drone layer is all speckled throughout, one here, one here. With laying workers, you see them in patches. So if you're seeing that and you're seeing multiple eggs all over, you got a laying worker. And even if you put in a queen, they'll kill her. They're dedicated to the worker bees, 15, 20 laying workers. They're dedicated, and they'll kill any queen you try introducing. So that's why I say, and it's almost not worth it, because you got so many drones. So in this case, it's not even worth combining onto another hive, because you're throwing all these drones with mites on them into that hive. So your best bet, just let them die off and let it go. Okay, go ahead. Now, we'll get into the brood issues. This will go a little faster, because the toughest part to understand, queen issues that we find in hives. With brood issues, you want to look for your brood, make sure you've got a good brood pattern. But the other thing you want to be looking for is puncture marks and sunken cappings. You want to be able to, in the eye, it takes a trained eye, you got to look closely. If there's bees on it, move them away, touch them with your hand, they'll move away, and lightly, gently, don't squeeze them. And then what you do is your puncture marks, you want to always probe and see what's wrong, because it could be something that you catch early on. You can bring that spiral back of building your hive back upward. But if you don't catch it soon enough, you're in a downward spiral. And the brood issues that I find, we're going to go over here in 1 minute here, but that's a beautiful pattern. You get those speckled, but it's an older comb probably. It could be that the cells are stretched, or there's wire down below, or they haven't been cleaned properly, and so the queen isn't using them. But I would consider that a beautiful brood pattern. And then you got the pollen right up above the brood. You notice the orange, and then the honey up above that. And they got, the nurse bees got everything that they need, the pollen and the honey, to make into brood food or royal jelly. And they got the brood, they don't have to go too far to feed the larva, the bee bread that they make. And of course, the hypopharyngeal glands, they add those enzymes. Those are very important in the development of bees and queens. Go ahead. This is what you see, close up, magnified as a macro lens. But the egg, in 3 days, the little larva that hatches out, go ahead. They grow very quickly. the nurse bees put the food. Yeah, you can see where the arrow is there, the little larva that was last laid, next. And then in the middle here, the larger ones that are almost ready to be capped. And the nurse bees feed them right up until day 7. They put that brood food down there. The nurse bees can also feed them direct, but most of the time they deposit the brood food. The larva can suck up the brood food and grow. And after 7 days, they cap it over. Go ahead. And under the capping, it develops into a pupa. Keep in mind, when looking at larva before it's capped, you always want to see it white and glistening in a C shape. That's one thing. So if you have a probe, look at a larva, C shape, white and glistening, that's normal. So for you new beekeepers that are going to have a hard time, all you have to know what's normal. And if it's not normal, then call me as the inspector or call a mentor and get us out there, and we can tell you what it is and what you need to do. So this is the tough part for the new people. Aren't going to probably understand what to do, but here's the pupa. So if you uncap a pupa, it should be white with purple eyes. Go ahead. And of course, in 21 days, you shouldn't see any puncture marks, sunken cappings for 21 days. You shouldn't see any capping damage until that little bee is hatching out in 21 days, chewing away the capping. You can see the antenna sticking out. Cute little thing. Go ahead. And isn't she cute? 2 little eyes looking around when she first comes out, wondering where she is, seeing the other bees for the first time. I just can only imagine what's going through her mind. What is that little bee thinking? Seeing, but you know what? Dries herself off. In an hour, she's back cleaning out cells. You see it all the time. I watch them. Take time in this hobby to enjoy the beauty of bees and the wonders of what they do. You're missing something if you don't. That's why you love them. That's why people that are really into this hobby, getting into bees, they look forward to getting into their beehives and see what's going on or watch them coming in with pollen. Nothing like it. Go ahead. Now, here's some of the abnormalities. Now, this is American farbrood. It's a bacteria. What happens? It's got a bacteria with a spore forming stage. So in this case, in the American farbrood, see the sunken capping? See how they're all sinking? That's because these bees aren't respirating. They're dead. They've died from this bacteria that's killed them. And there's no respiration. The bees know it. So the capping sinks because there's no respiration. And the bees puncture it and start cleaning it out. And as they do, they get their bacteria in their mouth parts. And as they feed the uninfected bees, they're infecting them with this bacteria. And eventually, there's no bees hatching because it spreads itself through the whole hive. And there's no bees hatching. They're all dying. And usually in 2 to 3 months, a hive will die out. And the danger of this is robbing. If bees come in, take the honey, the bacteria is in the honey, it's in the pollen in this hive, and the bees rob out the honey, the pollen, they'll get in contact with the larva, they're going to get their mouth parts infected, bring it back to their hives. Now you got it. Years ago, we had an epidemic in Holden. One individual with 40 hives came up from Connecticut. 9 beekeepers came down with this, and we had to have a large burning of hives at the sand pits because this disease, because it's got a spore forming stage, it lives for 30 years, and you try to activate that hive, and in the end, there's what it excuse me, that's what it looks like. Go ahead. And that's what the pupa looks like if you uncap it in the pupal stage. Go ahead. And in the end, there's no bees. The last of the bees, they're dying because they're still working. And see all the puncture marks? There's no bees to clean out the cells. And this is what you see. And I can tell and use the equipment if it had American farbrood. Next. You have a scale at the bottom of the cells that you see there and the pupal tongue. because the water is, the moisture in that pupa is desiccated, and this scale, this sticky scale that hardens up, and you can't remove it even with a little pocket knife. It's stuck so much to the cell. And I can tell with used equipment, whether there was flower brood years ago. I just found, okay, this year, I used his grandfather's hives from 21 years ago that were from the barn. And I said, uh-oh, because you called me to get them inspected. And I knew right away. I said, you got scale in there. And I remembered, because I've been around for 45 years inspecting. I had his grandfather's records on my sheets. And I said, he had flower brood, American flower brood. He put them in a barn with the hopes of radiating, never did. And luckily, we were able to burn the hive before he started, put money into bees and equipment. Okay, go ahead. And you have to burn them. The fire department will tell you where. You have to apply for a permit in certain towns, and they'll tell you what they have to make by state law. They have to give you a place to burn your hives. Go ahead. Now, sometimes it looks like a puncture mark. See the white larva, healthy, C-shaped, glistening. And here you might think it's a puncture mark, but if you open that up a little without damaging the larva, they'll reseal it. And you'll see white C-shape means it's healthy. That just hasn't finished capping yet. This one, they're ready. The one with the big larva in it, they're ready to cap that over. Okay, go ahead. And see the white, that nice glistening, it's not yellow, it's C-shape, all the way till when they cap it. Healthy looking, not crusty. That's normal. That's what you want to see. You don't have to know what these abnormalities are. You can call the inspector and we'll identify what's going on. But the sooner the better. Go ahead. And then, of course, European flower brood is when it turns yellow. You start seeing yellow, brown, twisted. This is a bacterial disease without the spore fungal stage. This one, you need to call the inspector, have it identified, and then go to your vet and get a prescription for terramycin. And what you do is give 3 treatments. You sprinkle this powder, terramycin, onto your frames every 3-4 days apart and give them 3 treatments, and it takes care of it nicely. So the sooner you catch this one, the better off you are in that hive, because it's back on an upward spiral. Whereas if this disease, European flower brood, spreads, guess what happens? You're back down into a spiral again. And that hive is, if it gets so bad, you can't make a comeback. With all of these, you got to get into it in your hive, find it, and if you find it early, medicate it in this case, and guess what? It clears up beautifully and bring the hive right back. But the more you wait, the less chance of bringing the hive back. Go ahead. And here you can see it. See brown, crusty looking, twisted, puncture marks. Go ahead. Next. And see how twisted, contorted, because it's dying, writhing in pain from the bacteria killing it. Go ahead. Now here's another bacteria. This is a fungal. This is a fungus. Now, everybody, a good portion of beekeepers in the spring when it's wet, damp, they can't get pollen yet, the nectar, you see this fungus. It tends to spread in the hive, and you see a speckle amount of these. They're like, what happens? You see this in the cap stage. But before you see it, you'll see puncture marks, sunken cappings, and that's the sign something's wrong. But in this case, you pull them out, it's like a little white pellet, and it's like a Nerf ball, spongy, and you can press it and it springs back. And this here will go away, and 80% of the time, it'll go away without doing anything. And if it keeps spreading, there are 2 forms of this: a viral form that's more viral, not a more fungal, higher level of fungus in this, and lesser which Dr. Stark from Tufts had done a talk to us once. So there is a more serious form that doesn't go away, and it keeps going in your hives. But in most cases, by May, the warm weather, the nectar flow, this will go away. And they clean these out very quickly, drop them down to the bottom board. And you gotta watch, is it spreading or is it declining? With this, you can let it go for a couple of weeks. And if you see it spreading on, one thing you can do, hygienics, you can get a new queen, requeen, and sometime more genetic queen strain will get rid of this faster. But in most cases, this isn't a real problem that I see. In some hives, it keeps going. It's a more strenuous, I don't know what the word, but strenuous formitus, and it don't go away. At that point, you have to shake off all your bees onto new frames if it keeps spreading and spreading. The other thing you can do is take the worst frames out, get rid of them, destroy them with the brood that has all this fungus in it, and put in new foundation, and sometimes that also works. But 85, 90%, this goes away and isn't a real huge problem.
Okay.
Go ahead. And this is what, when you dig it out with a toothpick, it's spongy and it has a mold, the light black mold, they call it stone brood, but it's just a little mold that grows on the outside of the chalk brood mummies. And what oftentimes you'll find this all on your bottom board. You clean it out very quickly because they can pull them out. They drop them to the bottom board and they pull them out in front of your hive. You see, looks like snowflakes. Okay, go ahead. A virus, sac brood virus. This is another thing. Puncture marks will show up, sunken cappings. And when you uncap it, what you'll see is the head of the larva turning brown. And this is a virus, also in the spring, wet, damp, and goes away. But if you have high mite levels, this is another virus we tend to see with high mite levels. This is a breakout of this virus, and it's not because of the weather. Later in the season, you're seeing this in July, August. Very likely it is high mite levels bringing on sac brood virus. The bees are stressed, their immune systems, and they can't fight it off. The majority of times I see the bees can fight this off in the early spring and it goes away. But if you pull it out with a toothpick, go ahead, it's like one big sack full of fluid if you don't puncture it. And if you take with your fingers and put that sack in front of somebody's face on a hot summer day and squeeze it, you get this liquid hitting at you. And that feels good because it's cool. Okay, go ahead. And of course, nosema. And we're seeing quite a bit. I've been out to quite a few hives this year, a problem because the long winter we've had, cold, and as a result, this is a nosema is a microsporidian that grows in the gut, multiplies in the gut of the bee, or so do all the waste of the bee. When there's long periods that the bees can't get out and release themselves, nosema is something that spreads more quickly and it's more vulnerable, and the bees have a harder time controlling it in the winter months because they're pent up, they can't get out and release, and the microsporidian will multiply much more quickly with a gut filled with feces in the bee. And you can take the bees actually, and when you squeeze their abdomen, if you're not seeing a nice clear light yellow liquid coming out, shooting out under the pressure, you see this black thick stuff coming out, that's nosema. And you're going to see signs of this on the frames. Go ahead, next one. All black thick stuff. They come out to the hole right at the end and just let go. And you'll see it on your frames because many of them don't come out. They just go on the frames and their abdomens get very quickly filled up and burst. And the thing about this, the bees try cleaning it up. And so the bees that don't have it will quickly clean up and they get this microsporidian inside their gut and it multiplies, so it spreads and it can wipe out a whole hive. I found 3 or 4 dead outs attributed to the nosema, real heavy. And I can see it by the frames. I took it, squeezed the abdomens, and then we can take a lab test, send it out, and it tells you the level of nosema. And we have 2 forms of it. Asian form of this is the one that's affecting us now. So what do you do for this? There's a medication called fumagillin. In the fall, you give them 2 gallons of sugar syrup with the fumagillin, which knocks down the microsporidium and keeps it from spreading quickly. In the summertime, they could have it, but at low levels, and therefore you don't see it. But if a hive is oftentimes not doing anything, just blah, more than likely it's got low levels or moderate levels of nosema, and then you can call the inspector, and then we can diagnose it by a lab test and let you know what levels of nosema there are. But these are the signs you're looking for, and oftentimes when you're going to feed your hives with sugar patties, this is what you see all over the frames. You know you're in trouble because there's nothing in the winter months to do. You could lose it. Sometimes if it's not too heavy, they overcome it in the spring if you get a big enough cluster. But usually heavy cases of this take the whole hive down. Like I've seen this year, because of the long cold stretch we had, not warm days they can get out and defecate. You're seeing much more of this taking down your beehives. Go ahead. Now, the last aspect here, the last third segment here. So just let me tie it up with brood diseases. You don't have to know what they are. Your best bet, if you're seeing puncture marks, sunken cappings, get into them on a weekly basis. And sometimes it starts off with 1, 2, 4 light little puncture marks. Always take a toothpick, probe underneath that puncture mark or sunken capping and see what it is. Is it a nice white larva or white pupa? Because keep in mind, there should be no punctures until that bee is hatching 21 days later. So that's why I say get into your beehives, because the sooner you catch those puncture marks and abnormalities, you can call the inspector, mentor, and have them tell you what to do. Okay, now the final segment here is something that came in 1989 called the Varroa Mite. Now the Varroa Mite is a mite. Well, before I go there, I found the first case of Varroa mites in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts here in 1989. I was wondering what they are. I saw them, and I had to call Jeff Pettis, who's going to be speaking to us, and ask him about what this was. And he said it's a new mite, a Varroa mite. It's been down in the southern states, been found, but it got up here with commercial hives pollinating, and so I found that case, and it's been tough ever since. Before Varroa mite, even with all the other things we had, like chalk brood coming in, a sack brood, all new things, it was still fairly easy. But once this little mite came in, what a challenge it's been in beekeeping. So what happens here, this little mite thrives on honeybees, both adults and off a larva. This gets can come in. How does it get into your hive? Even if you didn't have any, as your bees go out to flowers, mites jump off of other bees, then they jump on your bees and come back to your hive. They might be carrying viruses that the other hive had, and they spread it to your hive. So how does this work? Well, they come in. You could get pregnant females coming in, and of course, guess what? They're looking for cells, uncapped cells, looking for larvae. The way it works is the female will jump into a cell, hide under the brood food with only 2 breathing tubules. So you don't see them in the cells. But as soon as the cell is capped over, the female mite emerges from under the brood food and then lays 4 fertile eggs, which become the female mites, 1 unfertile egg, which become the male mites. They hatch out. And as they hatch out, guess where they go for their food? They jump right on the larva and suck the blood, but the fatty tissue. We used to think it was the blood of the bee, the hemolymph, but we know now it's the fatty tissue that they are engorging in. They puncture the larva and they start feeding. And can you imagine 4 female mites, a male mite, all feeding? maturing, and sometimes it's double that. Two female mites will get into one cell, and now you got double. Like that's probably what happened in this hive right here. And we opened up, pulled out the larva, and there you see all the mites just gorging themselves. And so what happens is if some of those mites have viruses, they vector viruses throughout the hive. And as these female mites that are now the brothers in the mite world, the brothers mate with the females. And what that then happens, each of these female mites are ready to jump into other cells and take over. And it's exponential because as 4 female mites come out of this one, 4 out of this one, or 8 out of this one, they're jumping into cells immediately and feeding on the larva, the pupa. And you can see here the pupa, and what they do is, they prefer drone brood because it's 24 days, and they're really at the stretch of at 21 days. So they do go to pupa first, drone pupa, or drone cells, I should say. But once the drone cells start getting cut back by July because swarming is over, guess what? Where they're all jumping. So in July and on, you see an exponential increase in mites because they all have to go to the worker brood. And now they're thriving on, and I've seen hives, every cell just about I'm digging out has Varroa mites on it. Now, in the early stage, you can't see because they're very clear. They're white to clear, and you can't see them. But after a few days, they start taking on a light beige coloration, and they get darker, and you can see them. Okay, go ahead. And here, when they get really so many, and most of the time, they're under the abdominal sections of the adult bees. You don't see these all over the bees very much because they're under the abdominal sections of the adult bees, get in there, and it's easier for them to stay warm and also to get to the fatty tissue and the bee gets weaker, doesn't live as long. In this case, here we see a mite right on the thorax of the bee doing the same thing. And these poor bees haven't been used to it, so they haven't learned how to defend themselves against this or come up with any kind of practices. So they're at the mercy of the Varroa mite. They're at the mercy of us, the beekeepers. Trust me. These bees can't handle the Varroa mite. They're dependent on us. I'm saying it again. This is the one big challenge we have, the worst challenge I've seen in beekeeping in all my years. Now, go ahead. And once you treat them, and I'll talk about treatments in a minute, once you treat them in the hive, the treatments, you see the dead mites. Look at them, the little rust brown. This particular board had, I think, like 1,800, and I had a student count these for me, put red marks on one of the boards, 1,800 and something mites after treatments was done. Unbelievable how many mites were in that hive. So go ahead. Now, if you don't catch and treat early with a high mite level, what you're going to get now are vectored viruses or larvae and pupa that just don't hatch because everything in life has been sucked out of them. And what you get is what we call parasitic mite syndrome. You see, not only you see uncapped pupa heads, they chew the head off and then they pull it out. And you start to see a more and more speckled pattern. And you see snot brood in there, a type of viral, it's like snot. It's like you pull it out, it's like you people that dig in your nose. You pull out snot, and that's the same, it's the same feeling. You think that's the first thing you think of. And of course, at the same time, the viruses are already infecting the larva, the pupa, and the adult bees. And the way they spread it is live bee contact to live bee contact, or by injecting into the to suck the fatty tissue, injecting into the larva, the pupa, and they're vectoring the viruses that they brought from another hive. And we have about 12 or 14 viruses. Whereas years ago in the 50s, we had very few. Here you can see the snot brood, the uncapped pupa heads, everything, there's so many mites eventually that this hive has no chance. There are no bees hatching because the mites are sucking all of the goodness out of the larva and the pupa. And even the adult bees are smaller. You see, if they do make it, they're much smaller, like you can see on one of the bees, right? Yeah, close, right below it, right below the arrow, right there. See this? They're small. You can compare a bee. Oftentimes, these bees that are hatching are much smaller because they've had some of the life taken out of them through the mites. And this, if it gets to this point, what can I do now? And I tell beekeepers, it's too late. This is beyond help. So now, what can you do to prevent this? So here's another close-up I just want to show you. Here you can see the pupa head. They've uncapped it. They're trying to keep up because by cleaning out, they're trying to be hygienic. Here's one they got where the arrow is now. See, they're pulling the whole pupa right out, and they bring it out and pull it, drop it down to the bottom board, and then on out to the outside. So you see the it's beyond repair. Every larva is dying because there's so many mites that are sucking your blood. Now, the viruses, one of the most prevalent is the deformed wing virus. So as the bee hatches, it's got the virus, and instead of a nice full wing, see the stringy wings and spiraled wings, there are now 4 mutations. Just like with the virus we're facing, mutations, the bees are the same thing. There are 4 mutations of this one virus. And so the mites are sucking the blood, the fatty tissue, I keep saying the blood, out of the larva and pupa. They're not hatching. The adult bees that do hatch have viruses. They're deformed. In the hive is quickly, here you see the greasy, see the chronic paralysis virus here with the greasy looking thorax, no hairs on it. Wings are twitching, you can see way out. A lot of them are twitching and they're coming out of the hive. And this is another virus, and there's a whole variety. We have to send a lot of them, send the samples in because some of the viruses don't have symptoms, but the hive isn't going anywhere. The bees are weak, and the viruses, and eventually virus bees all leave the hive. So the end result here is a hive that empties, and sometime in 2 to 3 weeks. And I always get a call, Ken, they absconded. And I go and I see that pattern with all the pupa and larva, no bees in the hive, adult bees. Well, guess why? Virus bees, to keep it from spreading, are leaving the hive. And so when you only see one deformed wing, I've heard some beekeepers say, well, I just saw one. Well, one's too many. That means it's in there. And more than likely, you're seeing 1 or 2 because all the others are out. They're kicked out of the hive very quickly to keep the virus from spreading. But at that point, it's too late. It's already being infected through the larva and the pupa. Here you can see a picture of 2, it's so heavy that they're even on the bees. When you see that, you know you got trouble. Mites on the thorax, and see the deformed wing virus right next to it. You're in trouble. So you don't want to get to that point. So what do you do? Now, the next thing, go ahead. Next thing, what you do is treat. And there are some things better than others, but I found that in this part of the country, you need to treat overwintered hives in June, August, end of September. The mistake that many are making, they're waiting until the end of October, no brood, and then treating with oxalic acid. I highly recommend doing an alcohol wash at the end of September. Doug has made a beautiful film on alcohol wash, how to do one and determine how many mites. You take 300 bees. If you watch his video that's on our website, and do an alcohol wash with 300 bees. If you got more than 4 or more mites, that means your level of a high out of 300 bees. So you treat your bees 3 times a year. And I find if you do that, you still have mites, but not nowhere their numbers. And the Mass MDAR has a brochure we made out, all the treatments that are there and what you can use when. Some are temperature dependent, others aren't. They're contact, a type of medications, but you have to treat for mites. There's no such thing. I've tried them, non-treatment bees. I've lost them, and I've been out there checking hives that are supposed to have to been hygienic and non-treatment and or advertised as such. They do not exist. Mites, I've tried them, and the mites build just like in regular bees. They may clean out the dead larva quicker, but they're there. And this gets back to the same chart where you see the loss of anything, or that happens right at that point where it's going a downward spiral. The sooner you catch what's wrong, the sooner you're going to bring that back to an upward spiral, with the exception of American foulbrood, where you have to burn your hives. But we're only seeing a small percentage of that. That's the good thing. That's the good news. We only catch 3, 4, 5 cases a year. So now, these poor bees, all they want to do is collect their nectar from the plants and pollinate at the same time. They're doing us a service. Go ahead. Pollen, bring pollen back to feed their young. That's the protein that is needed in the bee bread for the young bees to grow big and strong right on their baskets. Colors, a rainbow colors, that watch your bees coming in with the pollen on them. It's the most fascinating thing. Red, purple, green, yellow, black, blue, combinations thereof. It's gorgeous. Go ahead. And in your frames, it's like a rainbow. And the third product is the propolis. This is the resins from trees, and they add enzymes to it from their glands, and they produce this glue that they glue everything up with. It's only recently that Milos Spivak came to find out that they use this as an antibiotic for their health. They coat the walls of their hive. Inside of trees, they do it. At first, we used to scrape it all out and get rid of it. And I knew better. My dad, for sore throats, would make me chew propolis. And I'll tell you what, it was wonderful. He had for poison ivy a salve that he made from propolis. It cured. The doctor was sending customers to my dad to cure their poison ivy back in the 50s and 60s. So propolis they bring back, they glue everything up, and go ahead. And they build their wax from the honey that they need. So we can't be greedy. We gotta, rather than sugar syrup, sacrifice your honey, let them survive on honey. Sugar syrup has no nutrients. Honey has all the nutrients they need, especially a wide variety of nectars and honeys will give them that balanced diet, and pollens as well. So don't gyp them. Here in this, my dad's built these kept. We used to press this honey out and demonstrations for the club back in the 50s and 60s. And I sold the press. I kicked myself in the butt for doing that. I should have never. Out in New York, I sold it, and regret it ever since. So now with one last thing, hey, you wondered probably why. What does a bee inspector do? How can they be tired? Here you see me with 1,000 hives behind me. I've been inspecting all day for 8, 9 hours, 10 hours, and you can see I just look exhausted, which I am. I come home, my wife says, "Can we talk?" I says, "I'm too tired." But anyway, I'll just say to you that it's a wonderful hobby. Even though you got all these abnormalities, you can work with them. You can help the bees, and between the two of you, you can have successful beekeeping. Even with the Varroa mites and the viruses, as long as you adhere to get in there, help them when they need it, they'll take care of the rest. Believe me, they can take care of much, but you've got to be there for them in today's day and world, because in the 50s and 60s, it was probably a 30-70 propositions. Bees did 70, you did 30%. Now it's a 50-50 proposition where you've got to be there. So don't let them down. Get into your hives. In April, we're going to get into the last 3 aspects. on issues that we're going to talk about. And at that point, you'll know all the issues and you can identify them and be a successful beekeeper. So I planned this. I had some good memories. By the way, my first memory for my dad, and I'll end it with this. That hive I got at 6 years old for my birthday. I remember the day he said, "Oh my God," he says, "we got a super Seizure cell." I said, "Dad, what's that?" He says, "We got a super, they're trying to replace the queen." He says, and I remember the same thing that I did. Instead of allowing them to supersede, he cut them out, made sure the queen was there. And if they did it again, which they did, we took one of the queens from one of the nucleus hives that he ran and replaced it. And we solved it. He said to me, he said, "See, sometimes you gotta help the bees and solve the problem." And I never forgot that. It was kind of a good memory when I was doing the show, bringing back all these problems here, and brought back many memories over 45 years of inspecting and 70 years of beekeeping. I still love it. I'll never get rid of bees. My ashes will go in front of my beehives. All right, so with that, let's go to the questions.
So if you have a question, just can you, under the reactions, raise your hand and I'll call on you. No questions?
Oh, come on, there's got to be questions.
Hey, Ken, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so one of my hives this winter, I noticed a lot of bees on the snow late December. And
Okay.
then, January, when I was checking the hive, they all left. There was nothing in the hive. It absconded.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we're seeing
What
is
can I
the
do? I
virus.
can't inspect the bees because they're gone now.
Yeah. Well, the bees start coming out in the winter time. You can see them because of the snow. And in the fall, summer, virus bees that are leaving, you don't see that. But in the winter, and we've sent some samples down and coming back, and we can actually identify if you got a small little cluster left, identify what viruses took them down. But when there's no bees, normal bees, like I've been out with Nosema, the bees are going to be down in the frames in the cluster, and honey there. Or if it's something else, but starvation, you're going to find them in the cells in a cluster, and there loads of them on the bottom board. When you find no bees, and if you go into that hive now that it's dead, you'll probably see down in the bottom brood chamber, or where the last of the brood in the fall was, you'll see puncture marks, and I'll guarantee you probably see pupa heads. So go in there, and then if you want to put in for a dead out inspection, I can come out, because I just been put on starting Monday for dead out inspections.
So look at the caps.
What's that?
Look at the caps.
So Dimitri, if you want to unmute, and you can ask Ken your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, first of all, Ken, for the beautiful evening.
Yep.
I'm very new to that. I'm yet to start my first hive. When do I start it? What is the best time of the season to start it?
What's that?
When do I start my first hive?
In the spring. Oh, when to start them, the best time?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, no, you can't start them till, I would recommend, well, your experience, Joe, so I would say get the earlier ones. I always like the earlier packages or nukes so that they can get a good head start and get them going. And like I say, I think you were the one that asked me about northern acclimated bees in a call. Was that right?
No, it's not me. I'm just starting. It's my first one, so that's what I'm wondering.
First time. Okay, yeah, I would recommend the later one, later, mid till late April, getting your hives.
Okay.
Early on, it's more of a challenge, and that's be tough for a new beekeeper.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else with a question? I don't see any more raised hands.
Yeah, one more last thing just is people that are getting packages and have swarming hives, there's nothing like adding 3 of the frames from your hives that are gonna swarm, 3 or 4, take them out, put them into a package hive, because you can mix frames of brood and nurse bees. And man, I did that last year. Those package hives turned into honey producers by adding those 3 or 4 frames instead of making a split. So people that lost, had hives that are gonna swarm, that's the way to build up your packages or your nukes.
Some hands raised. Matthew, if you want to unmute and ask your question. Matthew, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Okay, yes. Kind of on the question from 2 questions ago, in this heart of this bitterly cold weather, I have a hive that every day 35 or 45 bees come out of it.
Yeah.
And, they go out, they fly 4 or 5 feet and die.
Yeah, that's bees leaving the hive. Two reasons with this cold particularly. One is the viruses. They leave the hive and you find empty hive. The other reason it could be if they're really stuffed up, their feces have been built up and they're starting to burst, they can feel, they will fly out to release in the cold, and because it is cold, they drop. You see that. I just seen some of the hives, the hives that have nosema that were dead from nosema. A lot of bees, and all out in the front, you'll see them. They just drop, and occasionally you'll see the yellow droppings out on the snow.
These have been beautiful, healthy bees, big, fat, plump bees.
Then they probably got viruses and they're leaving the hive. That's the big thing I'm seeing. I've been to some of the dead outs there in December. We sent out that had no bees, sent out the samples, and they came back. Usually chronic paralysis virus is a big one. They leave the hive and fly out, but they all eventually, all viruses, that's what you find. That's their way of keeping the hive from spreading, the viruses from spreading, and they leave. And I bet you the samples we sent out this past year, we've come across, out of the 12 or 14 viruses, we've had results back showing at least 11, and there's 3 we haven't seen come back in the lab tests.
And that's
Is there ever a point where there's maybe just the virus ones leave and there's a balance left that the hive survives?
Yeah, there's sometimes a small cluster, and you see, and I had that. I had like 50. I made a mistake about 4 or 5 years ago. Small little clusters. Thought, no, geez, they're weak. I combined them with strong hives, and guess what? I did the worst thing I could do. They strong hives all picked up the virus, and I lost those strong hives in May. They were starting to already dwindle because you never, unless you're sure that they have no viruses, they're a small little cluster. You combine a virus hive, a cluster, with a strong hive that's healthy, you're asking for trouble. So you can best, if they're still alive in some bees, call for inspection, put in a request. MDAR website, go to under the MDI, Mass Department of Agriculture Resource website, you'll see apiary, says request inspection, put emergency dead out, or emergency, and then we'll come out and we'll take a sample and send it in, and we'll identify what viruses even.
Okay, thank you. I'm from New York State, so you probably won't be able to help me, but.
Oh yeah, no, I can't, out of state people, it's only for, by the way, that's a good point. Inspections are only for within the state borders. I do cross, when I do Hancock, Mass, one beekeeper on the side of the mountain, I have to go 3 miles into New York and come back to go up on the mountain in Hancock to get into Massachusetts and inspect that hive. But that's the only one I can go out of state and inspect, but it's still Massachusetts, but I have to go through New York to get to it.
Okay, Tony Paulson, do you have a question?
Yes, please. Ken, thanks for your presentation tonight. You showed a slide of skep, and
Yeah.
I have beginner beekeepers ask me all the time about keeping bees in skeps. Those are still illegal here in Massachusetts, aren't they?
Right, they have to be in movable frames, but that's, the skep is, you can keep a log hive like I did for years. I put bars, wooden bars across in the log hive, so you have removable frames, and then the
Removable
skeps.
frames.
Yeah, and then my dad and I had the skep above, and that's where they put their honey. They build those nice
Okay.
sheath combs and then on a press, yeah.
Like a
You have to have
modified
movable-
bell jar hive.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
You have to have movable frames.
Okay, thank you.
Hopkinson, you're next.
Thanks a lot, Ken, for the chat. That was very
Yeah, you're
informative.
welcome. Be sure to be back for the April one, because that's the second half, and a lot of those are going to tie in because there's 2 factors sometime, and I saved the lesser ones, but the tie-in is very important. So the April meeting will finish it up, so you really get a full understanding of the entire problems that can occur with the hive. Right now, you're missing a portion, which is going to let you analyze some of the stuff because of those last 3 segments.
So my question is, you came out and inspected my hive in the summer and
Yeah.
said I needed to kind of spin out, I think, about 5 frames because I was in danger of being honeybound. So
Right.
I spun out the 5 frames, but almost immediately they just refilled them with honey. So I think I probably lost my hive. So is there anything I can do, to stop it becoming honeybound again?
What happens? Yeah, that's a very common. This question's always asked, and I can't. There's really not an answer from even the experts. Sometimes you got honey supers on, but once they start filling up a brood chamber, before you put your honey, even though it's a little bit, they'll finish up in the brood chambers, I noticed. So get your supers on, right away at the beginning of April. I throw on my first ones, and once they start going up there, then I find usually but people put on a little too late. They've already started bringing nectar in, and they'll even swarm. Dave Lucon at Dave's, I don't know if Dave's on, but he remembers the Harvard hives. I think it was his hive, and it was March 27th, and they had kept swarm cells ready to swarm out of the hive. So yeah, you got to get your honey supers on, not too early, but when you got so many strong hives. Right now, I got some really strong hives, and I know I'm going to have to do swarm prevention early, get my honey supers on early, or they're going to plug up. If they get the maples and able to bring that nectar in the pollen, boy, they'll plug up that brood chamber. So get your honey supers on early, and that's one way. And then other than that, all I can tell you, you got to then just spin out and keep that open. And eventually there's going to be a little drop in the nectar flow, and then at that point, you're all set.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, Sister Margaret, you're next. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Anne. My question is, so I have 1 hive, I have 2 hives. I'm a 2nd-year beekeeper. And the 1 hive is very active. I think they're just having cleansing flights, but I've seen a number of bees, they're actually like digging in the snow. And then most of those end up dying in the snow, but I see them alive, digging holes in the snow. Is there a reason that they do that?
Well, what you're seeing, and I see it here, some of mine, some of the bees that have to really get out and can't hold anymore, they to defecate. But when they hit that cold air, they just can't get back in. They fall into the snow, and they can't fly because of the energy, the heat, and for their wings. So you see them kind of with those legs moving away like they're digging. But they just can't get out. That's why I'm saying you got to be very careful in opening to feed nowadays because of the fact once you open it too rough and you take that inner cover and these bees hanging, they fall into the snow. Guess what? They're done. And so 1 or 2 and 3 isn't going to affect the hive, but what's happening, we're hoping for a warm day here so they can get out and cleanse, because they haven't had that kind of a day here, and they need it bad. That's why the nosema we're finding, and also bees out there flying out in that, because if it's a few, then, but if it's usually a whole bunch of them, then that means usually viruses, because one of the hives that I went to, it was chronic paralysis, and the bees were all bunches of them out in the snow. But you're from
Yeah,
France,
I'm
right? You originally
seeing
from
a
France?
good, yeah, our order is from France, yes.
Okay, thank you, sister. John Nicholson, you're next.
Thank you.
And after John will be Becky Allen.
Hi.
Hi, John.
Okay, I didn't know if you could hear me.
Yeah, I
But
hear you.
yeah, I'm going to be a first-time beekeeper this spring,
Right.
and I inherited a top bar hive, and I know it had wax moss because I cleaned it out. But should I do anything? Is there any way to tell if there was other problems, or should I be cleaning it out more with a solution?
No, if it's just wax moth, then there's nothing. All the frames must be chewed up if it was wax moth. Do you still have nice frames that are built out without wax moth damage?
Yeah, I had some. I kind of got rid of it all before I really knew what I was looking.
Okay, then you got to start over probably with new foundation. Unlikely.
Well, I have a top bar hive, so there is no foundation.
No, but you got bars that you're gonna put
Yeah,
in with
yeah.
a strip of foundation to start it, or not, maybe
Yeah,
you're gonna just
yeah,
have. Yeah,
yeah.
then there's so little likelihood of American Foulbrood, I say, then you're okay, because we haven't found it. What town are you in?
Springfield, Mass.
Where?
Springfield, Mass.
Oh, Springfield, Mass. Yeah, we haven't found any American Foulbrood, and we did quite a few there in Springfield, so I'm almost positive, and if it's anything else, it's repairable. So yeah, I'd go with it, and I'd say you're okay to start over and use that hive.
And should I be cleaning the hive?
Well, no, you don't have to clean the hive, because you mean the hive itself. No, the mites, viruses, if they took it down, they're not transfer. It's not, the mites are dead. Viruses don't transfer from the equipment at all. It's from
Okay.
YB to YB. So yeah, you're 90%, not even 5% even sure that it's okay, and maybe even more than that, because AFB is so minute that we're finding.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Becky Allen, you're next, and following her will be Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Ken. This was great. I'm a first-year beekeeper, and we added some sugar patties in the middle of January, and we saw live bees in there. But obviously, it's too cold to really be opening or anything like that. Are there any suggestions or hints in terms of knowing if you still have a cluster in there that's surviving?
Well, go ahead. I feed mine on actually, I like it better on the 20 something degree days. I'll tell everybody why. And anybody that goes around me knows. I open up on a 25 degree day, gently the inner cover. The bees are clustered tight, it's cold. Whereas it's at 35, 40 degrees, they're flying up and they land in the snow, and then they can't get back. With the cold temperatures, the only thing is if you got that inner cover, have somebody hold it up right over the hive, so the bees, you don't move it and put it down anywhere so bees fall off. And what you do is slide that patty in so gently, you don't want to rattle. And 20, so cold temperatures are the best, I find, for feeding sugar patties, because at 35, 40, they're flying all over. The bees are coming out, and they're flying because the cluster's spread out, it's warmer. And bees do a tremendous job in that cluster. Even when it's 25, you should feel the heat coming out of it, but they're tight together because of the cold. And I had a few beekeepers come out with me for the winter feedings here, and they're amazed how gently I did it, and how not a single bee flew out. I slid the patty on, overlapping the beehive just a little bit. So yeah, don't be afraid, because you don't want them to starve. They're
Right.
starvation right now. they've eaten because of the cold. By the way, to everybody here, the bees right now are going through, they got brood. They got to keep the temperature at 93. They've got to eat food to keep that heat. They got to feed the young. They're going through honey in those hives like crazy. And if they get stuck in the middle with that brood, they can't move out to the sides to get honey. They're going to depend on that sugar patty, and believe me, that will save them. But if they run out of that, only 3 days and they're dead. They're starved.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Sarah, you're next, and followed by John Ostrowski.
All right, thank you for taking my question. A couple weeks ago, I was doing an external, I was just checking out the bees externally, and I noticed in front of one of my entrances on the inside was a like big pile of dead bees.
Yeah.
And do you think that would be like a problem with the cluster, or it didn't
No.
seem like they were sporadic, like, you know, one dies once in a while, but it was like a big pile of dead bees on the inside.
Yeah, the bottom boards right now, I've been cleaning even on my bees. That's natural death, and they'll fall to the bottom. Bees, or if they're starving, they'll fall to the bottom. If there's no food, the starving bees will fall to the bottom. So what you have to do is go out there, clean out the bees, and then look up gently in your cluster and see, is it each week as you put in sugar patty, is it expanding? Your cluster should be expanding as opposed to dwindling. Because if they're dwindling, that means they're dying. So, but check on food to make sure it's not starvation. And then if you got plenty of food, and if they're way up at the top, they're looking for food, and they're coming up through that inner hole, that hole in the inner cover. That means they're looking. And boy, I put pig sugar patties on some of those. They went through in a week. I had to go back and in a week because of the cold. So yeah, right now, specifically with the cold weather we've had, out of break for the bees, they couldn't get out to just any other honey. They're with brood right now, and if you do, starvation will be a big problem.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, John Ostrowski is next, followed by Jim Haggerty.
Ken,
Yeah, John from
how you
Shrewsbury.
doing?
Good.
Ken, excuse me if I'm repeating something you might have already covered, but I missed the first hour of your talk today. You know, we work with a bunch of beekeepers. My little group has about 6 close beekeepers. We range from Rutland, Mass to Shrewsbury, and we even have one person who's down in Stamford, Connecticut. And we're all comparing notes year after year, and we're finding the die-off is unbelievable. We have some people who treat very religiously throughout the year, trying everything that's recommended, and cannot pull a hive through to the spring. And, you know, we have some that don't treat at all. And they, you know, everybody seems to do very well in terms of, you know, collecting honey each year. But come October, November, we start to see the die-off. And my 3 hives, they were all gone by November. Yet I pulled in over 300 pounds of honey from those 3 hives through the season. So they were very healthy going into the fall. I'm just wondering, what are you seeing in terms of the Central Mass die-off this year? And it seems to be repeating year after year.
We've been seeing about 40% losses from bees statewide. Central Mass is the same. And what we see is 2 periods of it. One is like yours in November. Now, let me tell you why. A number of things we found. A lot of people that are using the oxalic acid, and they're using it every 2 weeks for 3 times to get all the bees hatching from under the brood, because oxalic acid does not get under the capping. So instead, to cover it, they do it once. They get the bees that are already hatched. 2 weeks later, they do it again to get the bees that hatched in the 2 weeks under the cappings, and then one more time. And what happens is they're not getting under the cappings. But the other thing is overuse of this so much. They do the same thing in the spring, and there's word out there, like from Mike Palmer, that they're probably and I talked to a number of experts on this issue, is they said it could be tolerance to the oxalic acid. But the other thing is here, some people are using Mite Away in September and October, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Doesn't get under the cappings at all in September and October, and neither early spring. See, in Mite Away, which is formic acid, is got to be strong enough to get under the cappings. That's where the large percentage of your mites, the largest, and if you don't kill those mites under the cappings, they're infecting all those bees with viruses. And what happens is, as those bees in the fall are building nice winter clusters, they're all being infected. And if you get a lot of robbing going on from your hives to another hive or vice versa, and those bees are bringing in mites and viruses, your bees are going into other hives, they're bringing back mites and viruses, and you get a heavy amount of that, you get collapses in November and early December. The other picture of this is a little bit of robbing, a slight bit of robbing, and your mite levels were moderate, not heavy. You're getting a slower death. The virus is spreading slower, and that's why we're seeing like November, December, for those really strong hives that produce those kind of honey, we're seeing a lot of losses in November. I was unbelievable how many in October, November, and people think it's, I talked about it earlier, it's absconding because the virus bees leave. But
That's right. I had a lot of empty hives.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. And then the slower ones that we're going to lose in March, viruses spread slowly and slowly take down the hives. And by March and that's what happened. I was telling you 5 years ago, where I had all these little clusters. I thought it was just weak. I combined them, and when I sent samples out, it was viruses. So we have two.
So the viruses are the big problem right now.
Oh, absolutely.
The Varroa.
Oh, absolutely. The way to do it is keep your Varroa mites down, and at robbing season, put robber screens on to keep other bees from bringing in. But the other thing is, you can't keep that on all the time. We're finding if people that don't treat and let them mites and viruses build, and what happens, they're starting to collapse. And by October, they're collapsing, and your bees are going in robbing. Guess what? Mites by the loads are jumping on your bees that are in there robbing. So if everybody don't work together on this, we can't fix the problem.
Right.
And
Ken, isn't it also the density of beekeepers now in Central Mass? I mean, back when I started in 2004, I could overwinter my bees year after year.
Right.
And now I can't remember the last time I've overwintered a hive. And
I just showed Doug a big map of Northbridge, 39 beekeepers. You can't go more than a quarter mile without bumping into beekeepers. So unless everybody there, so many. In 1950s, we had 5 beekeepers in Northbridge. You could put 14, 15 hives in an area, get loads of honey, and not worry about any disease because the beekeepers were all so far apart. But once we got the surge, once the losses started in the late 80s, 90s, this big surge into beekeeping, then what happens is everybody wants to be a beekeeper, and they want to help to save the bees. But like, give you an example, I remember starting the first state trooper with bees, and now there's like 29 state troopers that are beekeepers. 4 of the doctors in an emergency room at UMass, one in Princeton he started, and then his fellow beekeepers, he came up to his house, friends visited. Oh, geez, something we'd like to do. And then guess what? There's a bunch of beekeepers now in that area that want to do. So we got all of them, 39 in Northbridge, Uxbridge 42, Grafton is got 51. So you so congested, and I agree with you that I don't know what to do about it. But if everybody everybody was on the same line, we wouldn't have the problems that we do. But that's the answer. I'm convinced. That's why everybody not working together, and that's what I said. Bee havers and beekeepers. You know, we need to have beekeepers, not bee havers. Yeah, it's nice. You know, Tom Brady's wife and him had a hive there. Well, they had a beekeeper that took care of the bees. But otherwise, you know, they wanted the honey, and that's okay. But at least the beekeeper took care of their hives, and you know, then it was fine. They're healthy hives that they had there on Brookline on
That's
their
right. But Ken, you know, as another alternative, if you're trying to overwinter your bees, maybe toward the end of the season, if you have an option to move your hives to an area, another town that has less beekeepers, you know, if you have that opportunity of knowing someone.
Well, I'll tell you, John,
Yeah.
it'd have to be up in North County where there's less. There's still a lot, but where there's less beekeepers up there. Here, Worcester and South, Spencer actually, and Leicester and South is tremendous amount of beekeepers. It's
Well,
those northern
Cape
towns.
Cod, Ken. Cape Cod doesn't have that many, do they? Cape Cod?
But Cape Cod has quite a bit, not numbers we have here, but there the foraging isn't good.
Yeah, I know.
It's wintering is tough there because of lack of foraging on the
Okay.
Cape.
Yep.
Okay, let's move
All
on
right.
to the next question. Jim Hegarty, you're up next, and Stefan after him.
Yeah, Jim from Southborough. Hello?
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim there?
No, he was.
Okay.
He's gone now. Stefan, why don't you ask your question?
I can. My question is, what is your opinion on extended release of oxalic acid?
Oxalic acid?
Yeah, but extended release, not regular use, but extended release, like on.
I haven't, I'll be honest, I haven't tried it, but it's not the delivery of it. It's that they built up a tolerance to the oxalic acid. And that's what Mike Palm was finding. That's why he had to go to Apivar, because he was finding, and I found the same thing. I've tried a few, and I mentioned to a few of the beekeepers, I says, I didn't have great, I had a high mite count after. So I go mite away, just so you know what I do. In June, mite away gets under the cappings. August, middle of August, mite oxalic acid, because it gets under the cappings, and you got honey supers, so there's that dilemma. You got to take out, because you can't have more than one honey super, because mite away won't work. It just diffuses too much. And so then the third thing, I go Apivar at the end of September. That takes me 45 days through November. And then if you wanted to try oxalic acid at, say, middle of November, try it. But at least I find that's been successful. My mite counts at end of October, when I did my last alcohol washes, I put the Apivar in. By the end of October, I had low mite counts on the, see, I waited a couple years ago. I waited till the end of October. So that gap between August and October, they built up without treatment, and the mite buildup of bees is tremendous for the winter cluster, that the mite levels were, by the end of October, yeah, there was no brood, but the mite load in there was so heavy. So you can't wait. We're already taking the hives down by the end of October. So that's why I changed my regimen. The end of September, I get my supers off, I put in Apivar, and that works well. 4 strips of that in a hive. Of course, it's a tougher, it's, you know, that's a pesticide in there, but they rub against it, and I find it does a good job.
So we have 3 more questions, and I think those will be the last 3 questions. So I'll have nobody raise their hand anymore. The next one is Bob and Lynn, and after Bob and Lynn, Sarah.
Oh, hi, Ken, thank you very much for your talk. The question I have has to do with the balance between checking your hive in the dead of winter and starving your bees. Before winter started, I put in a couple of candy boards, one in each hive. And I'm questioning whether or not to open up the hive to see if they're, just to see if they're alive, versus there's not much I can do about it if they're not. So.
Right. Well, at this point, gently lift and just see, you'll see the cluster, you'll see them down at the bottom. You know, I put in sugar patties on a weekly basis. They like the softer, you know, the type I made it. You can look at my recipe. It's on the website. But you can lift those up gently on a cold day and just gently lift them up and see. And if they're alive and you got all that candy in there still, then you're fine. Just let them go.
All right.
Yeah, 25-degree day. Don't do it like on a 40-degree, 35, 40-degree day. They'll just fly right up and fall in the snow.
Well, I haven't seen a 30-degree day in a long time.
I know. Well, yeah, the 25-degree days, that's why I've been feeding. I went out, you know, it was last week, it was 25 one day, 2 days, took 2 days to do it. And they were both there and they're gentle. So you got to be very gentle with it.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, Sarah, you're next, and after you will be Linda LeDuc.
Hi, Ken. So this question goes along with what Bob's question was. So do I wait for the 25-degree day? Like today it's 9.
Well, cold weather, if you're doing quickly, cold weather, they're going to, in that cluster, they're keeping that. I've done it on, you know, real cold, but you just got to do it quickly, look, and if they need a patty or sugar, then you put it in and quickly. It doesn't lift that inner cover. You probably got a riser in and just gently slide. They're going to be, you'll see, if it's 9 degrees, they're going to be in their tight cluster. They don't fly.
Okay.
At 25, I like 25 because it's not quite that cold.
Well, I have two hives. You know, on a warmer day, you know, this was maybe last month, I looked, one hive, I couldn't even see the cluster. And there was still, you know, kind of, you know, with the wax paper, you know, like you did, you know, on that little in-service you did. And the other one, the cluster was up there, but they really hadn't touched the, you know, there's still a lot of the patty left.
Well, then if you got that, you got a lot of honey down below.
Okay, so I wouldn't lift up, more than the inner cover. I wouldn't lift up like a super or anything.
No, unless you're going to put your patty in there, new patty, then you'll have somebody hold it up at an angle so the bees that are on the inner cover are right over the hive. So if they do fall, they're going to fall in, and you just gently slide it right in.
Okay.
I did. I have to do 106 of those, so that's why I don't do 9-degree days because my fingers freeze.
Okay. So if I don't see them under the inner cover, that's it. I just close them up.
No, because it could be deep down. There's still some hives, and deep down, take it off at that point, and would you breathe heavy, some heavy breaths right down in between the frames, and you'll see bees coming up once you do that. That's how I check. Or you can feel the heat. If they're not way down, you can feel the heat coming right up through the frames. They'll tell you, because they could very well be alive, but down low. I've got a few hives. They're still down, way down at the middle of the top brood chamber. So don't give it up and don't make sure, because when they do get to the top, you'd want to have feed. But if they're down there, that means they got plenty of honey where they are, and there's, you know, just let them go.
And leave them alone.
Leave them alone, because they're heating the honey up above them and coming up slowly but surely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, Linda, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. This has been very informative as usual. I guess it's more of a comment. You know, we've talked a lot tonight about the issue of the people having hives near you and in your region and then not treating for mites in particularly. And it makes me think of, you know, the state is encouraging all of us to register our hives so that everyone knows where, you know, your neighbors are, and that, you know, that we're all supposed to be taking care of our bees respectfully. But I wonder about it going even further. I mean, we all have to register our dogs, and our dogs have to have rabies shots.
Right.
And that was all because of a, you know, detrimental virus that was, you know, affecting human life. So our bees are doing the same. I mean, if we can't manage the viruses with our bees, it's affecting all of our lives. It's just a comment on how we might be able to move forward and how the state might be able to support us.
Right, this is something that I think we talked about, I think Dick Callahan and Guletta Group, and we tried to look into that. Why can't we require you, if you don't want to treat, then you have to close up your hive and let them die inside so other bees can't come in, rob, and affect the other beehives. I don't know if that went anywhere, but I know there was some resistance. I know there was quite a bit of resistance to people, because some people don't even want inspection because they just want to be private and feel that that's an infringement. But like you're saying, and you're right, that's my belief, that why do we have to suffer? Because in animals, they make them get shots in order to, why can't we either require medication? If not that, then once the hive is weak enough to be robbed, they have to close it up. So that's the only thing I can see. And I don't know, that'd be up to the beekeeping groups to, talk about whether they want something like that.
Well, I think your tagline of "we don't want to be bee havers, we are
Right.
beekeepers" is essential here for all of us to move forward in the health of the bee and our lives, as we move along in our food production.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, thank you.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'll just finish off with here, just, I say beekeeper, bee haver. I always say that, and the people, and it's funny, I know people's lives are so busy today, children, soccer practice, everything. It's been less now, but I say to people, I go in, and between you and I and everybody else here, I say, when's the last time you were in the hive? I think it was like a week, 2 weeks ago, and I go in and you need a pry bar to get the frames out. I say, when? And it's funny, they're embarrassed. Oh, that's right. We went on vacation so it might be maybe 4 weeks. But you let a hive go for 4 weeks, you have a lot of things can happen. And if it's the time with mites and viruses, your bees are all vulnerable, everybody around you. And no matter what town you're in, Central Mass, even Northern Mass, there's hives within a half mile of everybody. So you can always, the less beekeepers, the less chance of that. But I agree with you. That's a good point. And it'd be up to the bee clubs, the Mass Bee, to deal with something like that probably. And, Mary Duane, who's president of Mass Bee now, would probably, be somebody to talk to on something like that.
Thank
But
you.
on the inspection, anybody out there, we started dead outs, put in a request, and I'll come out, analyze your dead out. If we need sample, we'll send in sample and see, what viruses and most diseases I can identify if they died from the various bacterial diseases, and we'll analyze it. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention and hope to see you all in April.
Thanks, Ken.
March 5th.
Thank you, Ken.
Or March
Welcome.
6th.
March 6th.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, March 6th,